Now. Okay, hello everyone. Wonderful to see you. We are back with our Parasha Insights series, looking at the Parasha through the prism of the teachings of Rav Moshe Shapiro, which have proven to be very interesting teachings, very different in their nature, very unique, unusual, and sometimes wonderful, which has been really great. We're jumping into Parashat Bo. And if you recall, last week we began with the plagues, and we had the first 7 plagues, and this week we have the last 3 plagues, which seem to be of a different nature, which seems to be unique in a particular way. But we're going to be talking about the plague of the locusts. So I'm going to share the source sheet right now. And here we go. We are Parasha Insights 3, lesson of locusts. And just in case you are more curious, or to add a visual, I have shown here a picture of locusts at Kibbutz Sa'ad in the Negev in 1955. Just an illustration, because what is locusts? And you know, I'll invite you to add to my own observations, but really, before preparing this class, I think I had a very simplistic idea as to what a plague of locusts actually was. Plague of locusts is a group of insects that comes along and destroys the land. Okay, that's basically it. Is there anything more? Anything I'm missing to locusts? Okay.
They're flying in this picture, but they're not on the land.
Well, they're flying, they're landing, they're eating, they swarm. That's the nature of the locusts, I think.
Well, first of all, unlike a bee that has a queen bee, locusts have no queens. They have no leaders. They all go together and they're all sort of on their own. In other words, they really don't think about anybody else. Yeah,
beautiful. And that's what Moshe Shapiro is going to pick up on a little bit, which is that particular nature of the locusts and what the response of Moshe was to that. So let's jump right in. Lesson of locusts. Let's jump right in. Okay. This Vayomer Hashem el Moshe bo el Paro ki ani chbadati et libo ve'et lev avadav laman shiti ototai ele b'kirbo. God said to Moses, see, this is why translations fail us.
Yeah.
Bo el Paro. What does the word bo mean? Lavo. Come to Pharaoh. Not go to Pharaoh. How do you say go? We know how to say go. Lech lecha, as what Hashem said to Avram. We know that word is used. Bo el Paro. Where is God? That's the big question. If God is saying come to Pharaoh, where is God located? Where is God situated? But go to Pharaoh. Let's go with their translation. It's an unfortunate translation. Come to Pharaoh. Go to Pharaoh. For I have hardened his heart and the heart of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them. And this word display, which is also a questionable translation, Laman shiti. The word shiti, that I may place, I may establish. The idea in Hebrew, we talk about the even shtia. Anyone heard of that? The even shtia. Shtia is not drinking, by the way. That's a similar word. Even shtia, a tashtit in Hebrew is a foundation. And the even shtia is what we talk about, is that foundational stone that was used as the altar for Isaac, that was used, that the Beit HaMikdash is established upon. So that word is a foundational word, in order that I shall place, but in a very profound, fundamental way, my signs among them, among the Egyptians. Ulaman tisaper bo'oznei bincha v'envicha, in orders that you tell in the ears of your children, your grandchildren, asher hitalalti b'mitzrayim, that I have, in the translation, I have made a mockery of the Egyptians, ves ososai asher samtivam, and my signs that I have placed amongst them, vidatem ki ani Adonai, and you shall know that I am the Lord. So we're going to look at a number of things, and then just Rashi jumps in this word hitalalti. And Moshe Shapiro is going to explain to us, what this word is. What is hit alalti? Lehit alel. I don't know if it's a word that's commonly used in modern Hebrew.
Modern Hebrew, it means abuse.
It means abuse in this way. And we're going to, I'm sorry?
Hitolulut means abuse.
Hitolulut is abuse. And Ramosha Shapiro is going to take us to how it means that, to what specifically about this word is going to mean abuse. And I think it's a very beautiful interpretation for a very horrible scenario. So hit alalti here, does it mean I've abused the Egyptians? I have made a mockery of the Egyptians. Yeah, I've made a mockery. In Rashi, hit alalti, I have mocked. In Hebrew, sachakti. That's not abuse, right? Sachakti. The word l'sachek, litzchok, to laugh, litzchok, to play.
Make fun of. Make fun of.
To have fun at the expense of, I would say. Yeah, but there's the idea of fun is there from the same Hebrew word as mischak. What's a mischak? A game.
What?
Right? So God is saying, you're going to tell all the generations the way that I've treated the Egyptians, hit alalti. Right? Modern Hebrew, abused. But in this context, Rashi says, no, it's not. It's more like I have mocked. I think that's a good translation. But Moshe Shapiro says, where does this word come from? It appears to be from the word ilah, which means a cause, and alul, which means an effect. When a person is made into an effect of the causes that are unrelated to him. Again, when you're made into an effect of the causes that are unrelated to you, meaning things are happening in the world that have nothing to do with you, but you're impacted by it. He becomes a mockery, he says. The course of action that is wrought against him is not his. You're just at the whim of someone else or something else. He is harnessed with the course of another. You're just caught up in the wave, in the momentum of something that's happening in the world, and it's not happening to you, but you're impacted by it. It's determining your life. He is toyed with. Indeed, a toy is subject to the will of the one who plays with it. Its causes are not contained within it. What you do with a toy has nothing to do with the toy itself. The toy has no self-determination. The toy is at the whim of the one who's playing with it. Likewise, to make a mockery of someone means to harness him with a course that is not his. Hitalalti, now to take this back, hitalalti, it means I am completely controlling Pharaoh. Right? That's the idea. I'm making a mockery. I am toying with Pharaoh. It's as if Pharaoh is a mannequin of sorts, and all I'm doing is just making Pharaoh move around, just making Pharaoh do what Pharaoh is doing right now. From this point on, that's what I'm doing. I've hardened his heart to the point where I'm just making a mockery of him. Any questions, concerns, comments, thoughts?
Beautifully explained.
Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
is also a child, a baby, no?
Great. And if you'll, we're going to look right at the next source, because the next source, Baruch Shekivant, you have already intuited these sources from Eicha, Davak Lashon Yonek Al Chiko Batzama, the tongue of the suckling cleave, Olalim, Shalalu Lechem, Olalim, like little children. We see this word being used to refer to little children. And also, in Jeremiah, similarly, Olal michutz bachrim merchavot. So Olal is babes, children. So how does that refer to children? How is the same concept? Because children don't determine their own course. They're like toys. Whatever is done, they go little children. An infant, Moshe Shapiro, has no course of his own. He can only be as an object to toy with, the effect and allure of other causes. Right? That's the vulnerability of an infant. So it's putting this back, or this language, back into Pharaoh. Pharaoh is like an infant, and God is like the person entrusted with responsible for the infant. Wherever God brings Pharaoh, that's where Pharaoh goes. Whatever God feeds Pharaoh, that's what Pharaoh eats. Whatever God makes Pharaoh do, that's what Pharaoh does. Like an infant, no control, no self-determination. The causes of its life are not its own, to use Rav Moshe Shapiro's words. And he says, interestingly, I thought this was fascinating, the earliest commentators imply that olal, that the same word, is the root of the word olam, which means world. World refers to any complete system of cause and effect. It need not refer to the world at large, all of civilization, but anything that is self-contained, cause and effect, any organized self-contained system whose components are intertwined constitutes a world. And I included these parentheses. And again, what I'm presenting is coming from a much larger essay of Rav Moshe Shapiro's teachings. And he goes off on this whole tangent, of which I've represented it by this one parenthetical comment, which he says, by the way, the standard usage, we talk about Olam HaTorah, the world of Torah, doesn't mean the entire world. It's talking about a particular community, is the Olam HaTorah, right? And so it's a proof that the word Olam doesn't have to mean the whole wide world. It can mean a contained. We could talk about, the Olam of Shar HaShamayim. Is that a self-contained group? Is it something that's I don't know. You could talk about different olamot, different worlds. And then I love this. He said, although standard usages are not necessarily sagacious, that don't worry, just because it's the way people use the word doesn't mean it's actually correct. Just don't think that. Okay. Infants control their parents by screaming. Yes, there is a certain degree of control that's exerted by infants. But let's say the standard course of an infant's life is not when it's in control, but infants sometimes do take control of the situation. That is a good point. Abuse. Now we're getting to the abuse. The Torah is telling us that the events about to unfold, and I love this piece right here. The events about to unfold is a unique story of hitolalut, of abuse. Not precisely in a contemporary sense, but as Rashi states, I have toyed with them. They became the effect of causes that were not theirs and even against their will. They were made obstinate, and they were harnessed with a system of cause and effect of ilah and alul, not their own. The actions that were wrought against them were the actions of another. This is the concept of abuse. It need not mean cutting down piece by piece, as is understood nowadays. It means transforming someone into a plaything, into a thing that is subject to external causes. Again, abuse in this definition is transforming someone into a thing that is subject entirely to external causes. This is real abuse. The free will is taken away, and others place him wherever they will and do with him as they please. He relinquishes his courses and causes. He ceases to be autonomous. He is placed in the world, in the olam of another. He becomes the effect of an entirely different cause, led on a course not of his own design.
It reminds you of the word lul, which is a playpen.
Which is a play. Okay, maybe that's connected. Maybe that's connected as well. A pen.
Because you're in a world where you have nothing to do with it. In other words, you're not a master. You're in a playpen, and they play
absolutely.
with you.
And even the boundaries, the limitations of the world are established by someone or something else. That's a great analogy. But this is for me, this is a fascinating definition of abuse. Of abuse is one who is completely under the control of another, who lives in the olam. The hitolalut is somebody who is completely controlled by the ilah, by the causes of another, by another's motivations and thoughts and direction, and by the alul, and by the effects. The effects are brought about by the causes of another, who lives in the olam of another. And you can describe or take any concept of abuse or any manifestation of abuse and you place it within this description. This is abuse. The free will is taken away. Someone lives within the olam, entirely within the olam. entirely within the world of another. Yeah, Sandra.
So how should Pharaoh be punished? Because if his free will is being taken away and he does not have the right, the ability to respond to Moshe on his own, then why should he be punished for that?
I'm not sure that any of this conversation is adding anything to our understanding of Pharaoh, because we know that Pharaoh's free will was taken away, right? This is kind of getting down a little bit into the mechanism of it and into the definitions of it. But as to, Pharaoh's sense of responsibility or accountability for his actions, let's park that for another time, because that is a big question about Pharaoh. That's a big question. When God said in that first verse, I've hardened Pharaoh's heart. That's a significant point, and that certainly deserves attention. But I think I'm not sure that this, or what we're discussing here, changes anything about that question. But that question still is a great question and needs to be addressed in a separate context. The idea of shiti, Rashi says shiti means to place, means to set. I have placed these plagues. Going back to the first verse, Laman shiti ototai ele. So Rashi says, what does this mean to place my signs? Shiti. So Rashi says, Sumi she'ashit ani, that I will set, that I may set. And the idea is that we're referring to something new. It's not that I have set in the past. It's not, I'm showing you what I have done, but this is what I will do. And Rav Moshe Shapiro notes that this is referring to the next three plagues. This is a future description that I'm going to do. You've seen a lot of plagues. You started with the blood and the frogs and everything, and we've seen a lot. But we're going to see something remarkable in these last three plagues. Egypt is being led onto a course not its own, that would continue. And this is what must be conveyed to our future generations, that I am about to toy around with Egypt. I am about to control Egypt. I'm about to make a plaything out of Egypt. But what's the unique emphasis of mockery of these plagues in particular? What is this course and where does it lead? And so all of this brings us now to the plague at hand, to locusts. What is God proving with locusts? Now that we understand that God is toying with the Egyptians, now that we understand this unique form of, we're going to use the modern word of abuse, but we're talking about complete control. Now that God is exerting this over the Egyptians, then now, what is unique about this plague? So let's jump into, we have to have a little bit of Kabbalah, because why not? It's Thursday afternoon. We should have some Kabbalah. So this is a beautiful piece of Kabbalah, which taught in the Zohar, which I've seen quoted in a number of different contexts. And we have to, I don't know if there's any stretching exercises that we could do for our brains, but we need a little bit of elasticity to incorporate these new concepts. And this is a very, I won't use the word simple, but it's a very straightforward, I think, straightforward concept using two Hebrew words. So here we go. The starting point is the verse in Isaiah. Lift your eyes up high. Mi bara ele, and see, mi bara ele, who created these. This is going to be our key words. Mi bara ele. Mi bara ele. Mi is Hebrew. Let's just go. We have to go through the basics to understand this. Mi is Hebrew for who? Bara, created. Ele. What's ele? All of this. Everything. Who? What's who? You'll see the W is capitalized. Who is God? Who created this? Who sends out their hosts by count, who calls each of them by name, right? Merov onim va'amit koach, ish lo ne'edar, is great might and vast power, not one fails to appear. God is in control of everything. Everything is represented by the word ele, which in Hebrew means these. Me is representative of God. Okay? So we have these two components. This is the idea, is that there are two components in the world. There's me, which represents God, and there's ele, which represents everything that God created. Me and Ele. Can you take these words and put them together? These two words, me, representative of God, and Ele, representative of everything that God created. Can you take these words and put them together and create something magnificent?
Melech.
Melech.
No.
You may be getting into
Talking about these
gematrias here. I'm not, no gematrias, just the letters. Can you take these letters and mush them together? Me, who created these? The word me and Ele. Can we take these words? So the Zohar.
It's a Yiddish word, Mela.
Yeah. Well, we have to rearrange it a little bit. I should have said that. We have to rearrange it a little bit. You have to take these
Oh,
5 letters and
Malay.
rearrange them.
What
can-
is Elohim?
I'm sorry?
Elohim?
Beautiful. That's what the Zohar says. Bereshit, bara, Elohim. In the beginning, God created. Elohim stands for the words me and Ele. And that's what the verse says that we just saw in Isaiah. Me, bara, Ele, Bereshit, bara, Elohim. There are 2 components to understanding the creation. One is understanding Ele, is seeing the world for what it is, looking at all of Ele, Al Kol Ele, as the song goes, looking at everything and understanding who created it. No, who created it with a capital W. God created it. Mi bara Ele. Okay, that's your Kabbalah for the moment. Any questions? Because I probably won't be able to answer it. But if there are any questions, okay.
Why do you call it Kabbalah? I mean, I appreciate what it is, but how do you connect that to Kabbalah?
Well, firstly, it's from this is a teaching of the Zohar, of the primary work of what we call Kabbalah. That is the source of this teaching. And the style of the teaching, I mean, it goes much deeper than I'm presenting it, and Kabbalah will take it in lots of different directions, but this is a Kabbalistic teaching. This is a purely Kabbalistic teaching.
Okay, because
it
said Yeshayahu, so I was confused.
Well, Yeshayahu says, who created these? But you can understand that on a very simple level. Who created these? God created them. It's a question and there's an answer. But what the Kabbalah is saying, no. This is not a question. This is an answer.
Okay.
Mi bara Ele is not who created these ? It's who created these, period. Capital W. Who? God created these. Elohim created these. Right? That's the interpretation. It's a fantastic interpretation. Now it turns a question into, take away that question mark right there. Who created these? Who created these? God created these. Okay. What are we going to do with this? The division of this name is the root of all evil. So here's where the Kabbalah gets involved. The me and the Ele, you have to keep them connected because that's the only way you have God's name. You can't separate them. You can't see Ele without me. You can't see the world without seeing God. And you can't see God without seeing the world. We are therefore urged always to see me, the one who created Ele, always to see the connection between Ele, the abundance of these creations, and me, the one who created these, which forms the name Elohim. Me bara Ele. Okay? That's the idea. You have to have me and you have to have Ele, and with that you have God's name. What does any of this have to do with locusts? Good question. I thought you would never ask. So let's go back to Pharaoh. Let's go back to the Exodus. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, thus said God, the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. But what does Pharaoh say? Me, Hashem. Who is God? Asher Eshma b'kolo, that I will listen to his voice. L'shaleach et Yisrael, to send Israel. Lo yadati et Hashem, I don't know God. V'gam et Yisrael lo ashaleach, and I'm also not going to send Israel. So what is Rav Moshe Shapiro going to point out? What does Pharaoh say? Me. Who is God? What does Pharaoh not say? Elah. Pharaoh has taken the me and he has forgotten the Elah. He has taken the who is God, but he left out the answer, which is God created all of these. Pharaoh utilizes the word me, who, as a question. He does not connect Elah these to me, the one who created these. He remains in the bounds of Elah and ignores me. He is in the bounds of the created beings. He is occupying this world, but he is forgetting about the me, about the one who created this world. Okay, so what do we have to teach Pharaoh? So we have to teach Pharaoh, going back to the beginning, to the verse that we quoted above. We quote it again here. God said to Moses, Bo el Paro, come to Pharaoh, ki ani ichbarati et libo, that lev avadav, I have hardened his heart, the heart of his servants, Laman shiti ototai, in order that I establish ototai Elah bikirbo. Remember the Pharaoh that only quoted the me, or we're going to add the Elah to his life. Okay, I said we were going to go on a little bit of a Kabbalistic journey. So now we're pointing out Pharaoh quotes only me, speaks only of me in terms of a question, and we're going to connect that to the Elah, to the these, to part of it, to his life, to our life. We're going to connect God, the creator, to all of the created aspects of life. Okay, clear? Or 60%? 50? 52? I'll take it. Okay, nature of Locust. Thank you. Now let's go into Locust.
Can I ask, Rabbi?
Yes, please.
Must we assume that Pharaoh speaks Hebrew?
No.
So, and I'm sorry to ask the question, but in constructing all of the significance of me, what would the Torah have us do with Pharaoh with respect to communication?
No, I think what the Torah is presenting as the concepts, meaning Pharaoh said, who is God, in whatever language Pharaoh was speaking. And by doing so, our tradition is saying Pharaoh was missing that connection between the creator and the created. What language he was speaking, that's a whole other level of meaning that we have access to, but Pharaoh did not.
I understand, but the expectation that when you take Miela and you say what is missing from Pharaoh's response to Moses.
It's what's missing from Pharaoh's understanding, not from his language. His language, we'd have no expectations that he would make this connection of Mi'ela and Elohim. That's for us. This is the meaning that we're finding amongst ourselves. This is the meaning that the Torah is conveying to us through the Zohar, through the Kabbalah, through our sages, through Rav Moshe Shapiro. But Pharaoh would have no access to that. Meaning all Pharaoh has access to is recognizing God or not, and he does not at this point.
Understood.
Okay. Nature of Locust. Stop the share. Here we go. Let's go back in. Nature of locusts. The verse in Proverbs says, Arba'ahem Ketane Aretz. There are 4 amongst the tiniest of the earth. Vehema Chachamim Mechukamim. They are the wisest of the wise. Who are they? Hanemalim Am Lo'az V'Yachinu Bakayis Lachman. Why are ants so smart? Because they have no power, and yet they prepare food for themselves in summer. Right? They're wise. They plan ahead. Shfanim. We don't know the exact translation of the biblical animals, but we approximate. So badger is a folk without strength. Amlo atzum, it's not mighty. Viasimu basela beitam, but they make its home in the rock. I mean, they're able to establish, to fortify their homes, even though they're not that strong. The third is melech ein la'arbe, right? Arbe, that's the name of the plague. That's the name of our animal that we're discussing. They have no king, as Becky mentioned before. Vayetze chotzetz kulo, and yet they all march in formation. It's amazing that they all march in formation, but they have no leader. The nature of this species is that it comes in abundance, right? What is defining the species for us is that there are lots of them. That's why it's called arbe, related to harbe, many. Did anybody else make this connection before? Because I never did. Arbe and harbe, locusts and many of them. That's the nature of locusts, is that there are lots and lots of them that come together. Yet the entire abundance proceeds as one, even without a king. This is how King Solomon in Proverbs depicts the great wisdom of the locusts, is that they proceed as one. Now, what are they missing when they're missing a king? So just to look briefly at the way Maimonides describes king in the Sefer HaMitzvot, Maimonides in the book of listing all the commandments, the king, what's the point of a king? The kabetz kol umatenu v'yanhigenu, so that he gathers all of our nation and leads us. The nature of a king, the purpose of a king, is to be a unifying force. And in Mishnah Torah and Hilchot Melachim, and Maimonides in Mishnah Torah says, and this was within the context of forbidding multiple or many, not multiple, but many wives, too many wives, right? It says a king should not, he shouldn't have too many wives. He shouldn't have too many horses. Can he have a lot of wives? Yeah, absolutely, but not too many. Can he have a lot of horses? Sure, but not too many, right? That's what the verse says. It doesn't prohibit lots, it just prohibits too many. Well, why not? It says, so Mishnah Torah says, when the Torah forbade the king from accumulating many wives, its emphasis was that his heart not go astray. His heart, why is his heart so important? Shalibo hu lev kol kahal Yisrael. His heart is the unifying force. The king represents the great unity of the people of Israel, kol kahal Yisrael. And okay, that's it. Therefore, the verse commanded to have to cleave to Torah to a greater degree than the rest of the nation. The king has to be has to represent the best of the nation. That's the idea, because the king is the unifying force. And we're noticing, right? This is the idea that we're reading this back into the verse in Proverbs, in which we're saying King Solomon says that the locusts go together. They are unified, but what don't they have? They don't have a king. Somehow they maintain unity. Somehow they stay together, but they have no king to keep them together. So how do they stay together? And the Maharal, just to further the idea of a king, the Maharal notes that the Hebrew word of king, melech, is the reverse of the Hebrew word kulam, all of them. The concept is that the king transforms the many into one. All of them are embraced in the single individual. Kulam are within the melech. All of them are unified within the king. That's the idea. Locusts, on the other hand, have no king. They have no central figure that unites them. None of them is focused on the other. None even knows of the other, nor does the other even interest it. They don't interact with each other. They don't do it. None is concerned with anything but its own stomach. Each is focused on itself. Nonetheless, they all go forward in a swarm. All of them proceed as one. In other words, they are together, but their togetherness is not a unity of a vision of we have to do it together. The togetherness is the unity of their own needs. Their togetherness is integrated of many, many particulars, each focused on itself, none on any other, none on anything outside of itself. Okay?
So why did, when the time came when the Jewish people wanted to have a king, they were dissuaded by the Navi? It was considered not something that they should need.
Right. This is the
They
great.
were trying to be talked out of getting a king.
Right. This is the great Talmudic debate about the necessity of a king, as to whether a king is an a priori concept. Is it a good thing to have a king, or is a king only there if we can't keep the unity without the king? Therefore, a king is needed. There are valid points and approaches to both. But the king represents, but either way, either approach, the king represents togetherness, and but the king represents a unified mission, a vision. The locusts, the arbe, are not together in their mission. They are each after their own needs, each after their own stomach. They haven't bought into this larger vision of let's swarm together by the millions so that we can achieve X, Y, or Z. That's not it at all. It's we're swarming because that's how we take care of ourselves. That's how I take care of me, is by going to eat from that field. That's what unifies them. And the destructive, their transformation into totality necessitates that as a plague, they destroy in totality. They become the harbe. The arbe becomes harbe, becomes many. They don't destroy something specific. They're not a targeted strike to the right flank or to the left flank. They are a plague. They consume everything. The arbe, the harbe, consumes everything, doesn't keep it together, doesn't have a purpose like a melech would lead everyone, like a melech would lead kulam in a purpose. That's not it at all. The locusts just destroy. That's all they do. And looking at some other words, yeah, Tamara?
Yeah, in today's world, we look to a rabbi and we're not asking for a king. And for all the different denominations, we are very respectful of a rabbi, but we're not looking for a king. We're not looking for King Bibi or something like that.
Yeah, yes, correct. Correct. We are not in the market for a king now. Halavai, everybody should look for a rabbi. Rav Moshe Shapiro in an essay talks about how the plague of the locust somewhat parallels our mass movements towards particular interests, which is not centered in any particular value or any particular higher objectives, but the way that we swarm together as a society sometimes can often be destructive, when really it's everyone in that society not working for the greater good, not working for the higher mission, but just trying to work for their own stomachs, like the locust. He has that whole approach, and I think there's something that's worth thinking about there. We're not going to go there together, but I think that's something that's worth looking at. We're going to look at just a few to further this idea, just a few of the words that we use to talk about the locust. There are a lot of different words for locust. I did a lot of research on locusts, just so you should be reassured that I've done what the kids today call research. What we in our day used to call Googling, the kids today call research. So I did research, which means I spent 10 minutes Googling it, but I learned a lot, I think, none of which I can substantiate as reliable information, but it's all there on the internet, and you have to believe the internet. So what the cutter is, so anyway, and there are different words because there are different types of locusts, different species of locusts. What the cutter has left, the locust has devoured. So this word cutter is also a word, they're all synonyms for locusts. So the word that the verse is using, hechasil, the hopper, the grub, the gazam, and another word is the slutsal. Kol etzcha upiryad matecha yaresh hatzlatsal. So he calls it slutsal here. This is in the curses of what's going to happen, is the cricket. But really, it's all the same animal. We have a lot of different words for the idea of these insects that are coming in and swarming and consuming all of the produce of the land. And what is this slutsal? Right? That looks like a word like we should know it. It almost looks like a familiar word to use the cricket, right? And any thoughts?
It's a field soul, like
yeah, which is
like a ringing or a
like the ringing of a yeah. So the ringing of a bell, the sounding, the vibrations. So you could imagine that this is the sound that a cricket is making. You could imagine that this is the sound they're making as they're calling out to each other, putting their wings together, or whatever it does. You could imagine that that's it. Some of the commentators say that. Look at Rashi says, what's the slutsal? Where does the word come from? Oh, firstly, Rashi says this is a min arbe. This is a type of locust. By the way, you should know slutsal is a locust, and the Siftei Chachamim, who is a super commentary on Rashi. The Siftei Chachamim says, why is it a locust? Lahachi nikrat slutsal. That's why it's called slutsal. Shehu milshon b'tziltzalei trua, like the cymbals, clanging cymbals. Klomar ba'im harbe biyachad u'ba'im b'kol b'muma. They come, a lot of them together, and they make a big noise and a big commotion. Right? That's why it's called the Slutsal. The Hamek Davar of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv, says no, that Slutsal is a different, come from the word sail, which means shade. Why is it called shade? Because it's like that it covers the entire land, just like shade covers the entire land. Interestingly, Rav Moshe Shapiro takes the complete opposite approach. He says it's called the Slutsal. It's called the Slutsal. Yes, from the language of shade, of tzel, but remember, Hamek Davar said it's called shade because it casts shade. The animals cover the entire land like shade. And Rav Moshe Shapiro says, no, that's not it. It's because they eat everything and they leave no shade. There's no shade left in the land. So it's a complete opposite of the understanding. And he says, look at this. Chasil, we saw the language of chasil. It's from Russian, from the language of chisul, of extermination. Gozam, another word that was used for these animals, means to cut. From the word ligzoz is to shear or to cut. Slutsal from the word sail or shadow or shade, for they do not leave behind a trace of a shadow on the ground. There's nothing, there's no produce left, there are no trees, there's no plants, nothing. And by the way, he said, very interesting, that there's a class of words that have reverse meanings. You can use the same word for reverse meaning. The ikar, and we talked about this in one of our early classes on Moshe Shapiro, he gave these examples, but the ikar, which means primary, and la'akor means to remove the primary influence. Shoresh, the Hebrew word shoresh, is a root, and lisharesh means to uproot. And I'm sure in other languages we could come up with similar ideas and similar definitions of words that mean what they mean, and they can also come to mean the exact opposite. A few are escaping me now. If I stop and think about it, I'll come up with it, but it won't be a very good use of our time because it is trivia after all. Okay. Going back and closing the loop. With this plague of locusts, this is the first plague in which death is referred to. This is the first plague that's connected to the concept of death. Locusts transform into a communal entity to do evil. They constitute totality for absolute destruction. This is why they destroy everything and leave nothing behind. With all other plagues, there's no mention of death. The plague of locusts is called death, for it strikes the very essence of life. After locusts, after they come, after they pass through, there is no life left. And now the response to this is actually quite moving. So at the very end, what's going to happen? They shall cover. This is the nature of the plague. Is they're going to cover the surface of the land. No one will be able to see the land. They'll devour the surviving remnant. They shall fit your palaces and the houses. All right, something that neither. They shall fill your houses. And with that, he turned and left Pharaoh's presence. And the servant said, "How long are you going to do this? We've lost." And so Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says now, "Lechu ivdu et Hashem Elokeichem, go serve God, mi v'mi ha'olchim." And Moshe says, we all are going to go. Binarenu v'zkenenu lelech, our young and our old, bevanenu bivnotenu, our sons, our daughters, b'tzonenu b'karenu nelech, with our flocks and our herds, ki chag Hashem lanu. For we are going, it's a festival of God to us. And Rav Moshe Shapiro says this word chag, we have to understand what it means. The word chag, he says it's connected to this idea of chug. A chug is a circle. Those, I think we had made a mention before the class of Camp Masad. I don't know if they use the word chug at Camp Masad, but it's a commonly used word in some of the Hebrew-speaking classes. A chug is, I don't know how to describe it. It's an elective, it's a period, it's a...
We used to use it in a club.
Our
A club.
A club.
study groups are chugim.
a club. So he says, again, this didn't occur to me, but Rav Moshe Shapiro says this idea, this word of chug, is connected to the idea of chag, and literally, it's a circle.
Well,
Chug
the Talmud says that God sits in a circle and all the tzaddikim sit around him.
Yeah, we're going to get there, and he also connects it to choni hame'agel, because it's described as an ag uga. So the word uga with an ayin and the chug are going to be connected in terms of a circle. The meaning is clear.
There's
It's
a song like
insinuated
that.
in the words of the sages. The response of Moshe was that all of us, without exception, are focused toward the one. We are all in a circle rallying around the center. This is our celebration of God, a chag, our circle around him, a chug. Consequently, we must all go. Not one element among us departs from this circle. And that's the idea that you were just mentioning at the end of the tractate Ta'anit, where it says, Atida Kadosh Baruch Hu la'asot machol tzadikim, to make this circle. V'yoshev b'neihem b'gan Eden, kol echad echad mareh, and everyone points and says, this is God. This is the one. Nagila v'nismecha b'yeshuato. This is the one. So he took us on quite a journey today from the ideas that we started with, from the idea of the locusts, but the idea of God toying around with the Egyptians, of God using, and to use that harsh and very serious contemporary word of abuse, but God taking complete control over the Egyptian. That's what's happening. That's what's happening right now. Why? What's the point? The point is to get them to that connection, to making that connection between me and Elah, to creating that concept of Elohim, which means Lord, which is dominion. And God is taking that idea of me and Elah. The Egyptians only had me, and now adding the Elah and showing that God has created all of this, that God is responsible for everything. The nature of locusts is that they have unity, but they have disunity within that unity. That they are not together in mission, they're not together in vision, as the king, as God is supposed to bring them together. And so the response to the locusts is the chag, is that circle. Chag, the chug, the circle. You want to know how to respond to a nation that's just working together, but not with a mission, not for a higher purpose, is you create that higher purpose. You live with that higher purpose. You embrace the idea of chag, of chug, and you show that we can sit together in a circle with God in the center of that circle. That's our notion of righteousness. For the Egyptians, the notion of righteousness, of achievement, of accomplishment was like the locusts, was going forward and destroying, was going forward and diminishing others, of enslaving others, of serving their own stomachs, of serving their own needs without any concept of a higher service. And our response is Chag Hashem Lanu.
That's
It's
probably
that circle.
festival. That's probably where festival comes from.
Probably where festival comes from. It's a beautiful. I think it's a beautiful response, because you have these images of the locusts all moving together. And now, when I think, I'm going to think differently about the plague of locusts. When I do, when we talk about it on Passover, the idea of the locusts are this herd of within society. We could think about this also, but this herd that's just self-interested and moving together, not because they have any connection to each other, or to any leader or anything like that, but because they're all self-interested, and that's why they move together for their own self-service. And
Who is Ta'anit?
I'm sorry?
The source Ta'anit.
Yeah.
It's not a usual source that I'm familiar with. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Sure. It's actually the very, very end of Tractate Ta'anit. It's the last lines of the tractate. It's how the tractate concludes. And with this particular vision of the righteous sitting in a circle and pointing to God and saying, this is our God. God will nagila v'nismecha b'shuato. We're going to rejoice in God's salvation. That's the end of the last chapter of Ta'anit. How we get there offhand, it's a long long circuitous journey to get there, but there's a whole study as to how tractates conclude, because sometimes they even deviate from their subject matter. There's always something fulfilling. Very rarely does a tractate actually conclude with kind of dry material that's been discussed throughout the tractate. Sometimes there'll be a piece of agarata, a piece of interesting teaching to close off a tractate.
Usually it's a hint already to the next tractate very often.
Yes. Yeah, Esther.
I just had a thought when I think after listening to all this, the locusts and the swarming and the but being in a formation, even though they're not being led by anybody, is somewhat like a group of people who want to be part of a group. They don't know what that group's about, but they want to be part of the group. And they're going in the direction of the group, no matter, just because they want to be part of a group without thinking.
Yeah, I think Rav Moshe Shapiro is noting as well that they really have no interest in each other.
Yeah.
The locusts are not there for the group. Each one is there for itself individually. And what one of the rabbit holes, or the locust holes, I should say, that I went down in my looking up locusts had to do with how certain species of locusts can be cannibalistic as well, because that's really, if they don't eat the food, then they're going to eat each other. And what propels, and there was a theory, again, I don't know, I can't cite the scientific sources that gave me this, but there's a theory that the herd moves based on fear of the ones behind it consuming it. So the idea is that they're constantly running away from each other. That's what propels them until they settle on a source of food in which they can have reassurance that they themselves will no longer be a food because there's abundant food around them. It's a very kind of a horrible way of imagining life, but that was one of the, I think, scientific things that I read about these locusts. Also, that they are uniquely attracted to a salt content in certain liquids that emulates the degree of salt content in their own bodies, meaning they find satisfaction in their own cannibalism because of a predisposition to a particular composition, which is themselves.
Just
it's
would have
interesting.
a lot to do about that.
I was watching a nature program and they were talking about salamanders in this pool of water, and I can't remember what part of the world it was in. As the pool shrinks, some of the little salamanders that don't grow and eat enough end up, and you see this big salamander, they end up being predatory and they eat their own brothers and sisters, so to speak, because there isn't anything else around it. And eventually there's only one or two that are left that climb out on ground,
Right.
Survive on the ground.
So all this to say, and in response to Esther's observation, I think Rav Moshe Shapiro's point is that they are really self-serving, and they're not interested in the group. They're not interested in socialization. They're not interested in, I think people are different, and I think you could point to certain examples of how people will follow out of a social desire, or will join a group or join an initiative out of social desire. That's not the locusts. The locusts are looking for food. They're looking for their own needs, but nothing higher, nothing greater, nothing more fulfilling than that.
But sometimes the people that are in that group are there for themselves, not for the other people. They're only there because they want to satisfy themselves, and sometimes they do eat, so to speak, the other people when they get in their way.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm gonna have nightmares.
How does it, I remember hearing that there's certain bugs Jews are allowed to eat that are considered kosher. Isn't grasshoppers one of them? Aren't they similar to locusts and crickets?
Yeah, I consider myself an expert in many areas of Jewish law. Consuming insects is not one of them. But that to say, there are insects that are kosher. And, if anyone, maybe we should do a synagogue mission. There's a kosher fest in New York City every year, held at the Javits Center in Manhattan. And one of the featured displays is on kosher insects, and you can buy kosher chocolate covered kosher insects. You can buy all types of deep fried, interesting things that are 100% kosher, and that I pray never makes it onto my onto my plate. That's not an ambition of mine. But yes, you're right. There are certain insects, the Torah says there are certain insects that are kosher, and there are some people who do eat those. I am not one of those, and I don't know that I know anyone who is one of those, but there are people out there, foodies,
But you know, is
who
grasshopper,
will consume that. Hey,
are
we've reached,
grasshoppers considered one of the kosher?
we've reached our time, so I'm going to sign off now and wish everyone a wonderful Shabbat, and we'll meet together again. Please join us next week.
Shabbat
Same
shalom.
time, same
Shabbat
channel.
shalom,
Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi.
Thank you.